The words hit me like bullets in that sterile conference room. Is this really the best you can do, Maggie? Are you seriously telling me this is the result of your leadership? Terry's voice dripped with contempt as 50 pairs of eyes burned into my skin. My face flushed hot, my hands trembling under the table where no one could see. The entire team watched in uncomfortable silence, some looking away, others barely hiding their satisfaction at witnessing my public execution. I wanted to scream. I wanted to defend myself, to explain that the project delays weren't my fault, that I'd warned him about the risks. But my throat closed up, words dying before they could form. Terry stood there, arms crossed, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. He'd won this round, humiliating me in front of everyone who mattered. But something shifted inside me in that moment. Something cold and determined. This wasn't going to be my story. This wasn't going to define me. I wasn't the victim he wanted me to be. My name is Maggie, and this was the day everything changed. I walked back to my desk in a daze, my legs moving automatically while my mind replayed every brutal word. 3 years I'd worked here. 3 years of late nights, missed dinners, sacrificed weekends. 3 years of climbing slowly, methodically, doing everything right. And this was my reward. Public humiliation because Terry needed someone to blame. The office felt different now. I could feel the whispers following me, could sense the pitying glances and the satisfied smirks from those who'd always resented my quiet competence. My hands shook as I sat down, staring blankly at my computer screen. But beneath the humiliation, something else was growing. Not anger exactly, more like clarity. Terry had just made the biggest mistake of his career. He'd underestimated me. He'd assumed I'd crumble, that I'd slink away defeated. He didn't know who he was dealing with. I pulled up the project files, my fingers steadying as purpose replaced shock. The project wasn't failing. Everything was actually on track. Terry had just needed a scapegoat, and I'd been convenient. But that was fine. Let him think he'd broken me. Let him feel powerful. I was done being his punching bag. Now I was going to be his worst nightmare. The next morning I arrived an hour early. The office was quiet, just the hum of computers and the distant sound of the cleaning crew. I sat at my desk and began going through everything systematically. Every email, every report, every decision point on the project. I wasn't looking for excuses. I was looking for ammunition. Terry had called me out publicly, but he'd been sloppy. He'd blamed me for delays that stemmed from his own poor planning. He'd criticized my leadership while ignoring his refusal to approve resources I'd requested weeks ago. The evidence was all there, sitting in my inbox, in project logs, in meeting minutes. I started a separate folder on my personal drive. Not to use immediately but to have ready. Because I knew Terry. He was arrogant and impulsive, quick to blame others but slow to take responsibility. This wouldn't be his last attack. But next time I'd be ready. My colleague Oliver arrived around 8, stopping by my desk with coffee. "Hey, about yesterday," he started awkwardly. "Don't," I said quietly, managing a small smile. "It's fine." But it wasn't fine, and we both knew it. Oliver had worked with me long enough to know Terry's criticism was unfair. The sympathy in his eyes told me others knew it too. That was useful information. Days crawled by like months. Every morning felt like walking into enemy territory. Terry barely acknowledged me in meetings, and when he did, his tone dripped with condescension. "Maggie, try to keep up," he'd say, or "let's hope you can handle this one." Each barb was designed to diminish me, to keep me in the box he'd built. I kept my head down and my mouth shut. Not because I was beaten but because I was observing. I watched how Terry operated, really watched. His patterns became clear. He'd swoop in at the last minute on projects, claim credit when things went well, and point fingers when they didn't. He spoke confidently about topics he barely understood, relying on his team to cover his gaps while he took the spotlight. His greatest weakness was his ego. He genuinely believed he was brilliant, that his instincts were always right. He made decisions based on gut feelings rather than data, then got defensive when questioned. And because he'd been director for 5 years, people had learned not to challenge him. But empires built on arrogance always crumble. I just needed to position myself correctly when his fell. I started documenting everything. Not obviously but carefully. Screenshots of contradictory directions. Copies of emails where I'd flagged problems he'd ignored. Quietly, methodically, I was building my case. 2 weeks after the public humiliation, I got my first small victory. One of my teammates, Kelsey, came to my desk looking frustrated. "The client dashboard Terry approved isn't working," she said. "The data structure won't support what he promised them." I'd known this would happen. I'd warned Terry in a meeting 3 weeks ago, but he'd dismissed my concerns. "Sometimes you need to think bigger, Maggie," he'd said patronizingly. Now his bigger thinking had created a bigger problem. "Use the framework I proposed in that email," I told Kelsey calmly. "The one from last month. It'll solve the data issue and give the client even better functionality." Kelsey's face lit up. "That's perfect. Why didn't Terry go with this in the first place?" I just smiled. Sometimes these things take time to become clear. Within 2 hours, Kelsey had implemented my solution. Within 3, the client was praising the improved dashboard in an email that went to the whole team. Terry's response was brief. "Good save, team." No acknowledgement of the problem. No mention of who'd actually solved it. But that was fine. Team knew. Kelsey knew. And slowly, carefully, I was rebuilding my reputation with the people who actually did the work. Terry could have the spotlight. I'd take the respect. The evidence kept piling up. Terry's leadership style was becoming impossible to ignore, at least for those paying attention. Projects consistently ran over budget because he'd make flashy promises to clients without consulting the team about feasibility. Deadlines slipped because he'd wait until the last minute to make critical decisions. And somehow it was always someone else's fault. I started positioning myself as the fixer. When problems arose, I'd quietly step in with solutions. When Terry's grand visions hit reality, I'd be there with practical workarounds. Never publicly. Never in a way that made him look bad directly. Just consistent, reliable competence. Oliver noticed. "You're playing this smart," he said one afternoon, his voice low. "Terry's digging his own grave, and you're just handing him the shovel." "I'm just doing my job," I replied innocently. He grinned. "Right. Keep doing that." The thing about Terry was that he never looked down. He was too busy managing up, impressing senior leadership with confident presentations and bold promises. He didn't notice the growing cracks in his foundation, didn't see how his team was slowly shifting their loyalty. But I noticed. I noticed everything. And I knew something Terry didn't. Senior leadership was starting to ask questions. The projects weren't delivering the results he'd promised. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning during a client presentation. Terry was walking through a proposal for expanding their services, speaking with his usual confidence. But he'd made a critical error in the numbers, over-promising capacity we didn't have. I saw it immediately. So did Oliver. The client looked confused, asking clarifying questions Terry couldn't answer properly. He started to stammer, his confidence cracking. I waited exactly 3 seconds. Long enough for the discomfort to register. Not long enough for disaster. "Actually," I said smoothly, "what Terry means is that we can achieve that capacity in Phase 2. Phase 1 focuses on optimizing current systems, which gives you immediate value while we scale resources. May I show you the timeline?" I pulled up my laptop, displaying a detailed implementation plan I'd prepared weeks ago as a contingency. The client leaned forward, interested. Terry's jaw tightened, but he couldn't object without looking incompetent. The presentation recovered. The client left satisfied. And for the first time, I saw something new in Terry's eyes when he looked at me. Fear. "Good save," he muttered afterward, the words forced. I smiled pleasantly. Just doing my job. But we both knew something had shifted. The power dynamic had cracked. Word spread faster than I expected. By the end of the week, 3 different colleagues had mentioned the client presentation, praising how I'd saved Terry from a disaster. I downplayed it each time, but the message was clear. People were noticing. More importantly, people were starting to come to me instead of Terry. When technical questions arose, when project complications needed solving, when clients had concerns, I was increasingly the first person they contacted. Terry still held the title, still attended the high-level meetings, but the actual work, the real decision-making, was flowing through me. I didn't advertise this shift. I didn't need to. Results spoke louder than titles. Senior leadership was noticing too. I'd gotten 2 emails from the VP asking for my input on strategic initiatives. Casual questions, nothing formal but significant. They were testing me, seeing if I could think beyond my current role. And I made sure my responses were thoughtful, strategic, and backed with data. Everything Terry's presentations weren't. The irony wasn't lost on me. A month ago, Terry had publicly destroyed my credibility. Now, that same moment was becoming my origin story. The person who'd taken the hit and kept working. The professional who responded to humiliation with excellence. People respect competence, but they respect resilience even more. Terry's overconfidence finally caught up with him in spectacular fashion. He'd committed to a major project redesign without consulting anyone, convinced his vision was exactly what the company needed. He'd presented it to senior leadership with his usual bravado, promising transformative results in an impossible timeline. They'd approved it, and now it was falling apart. The team was working 70-hour weeks trying to meet deadlines Terry had pulled from thin air. Resources were stretched beyond capacity. The original project parameters kept changing because Terry kept having new, brilliant ideas that contradicted his previous brilliant ideas. I watched it unfold with careful detachment. I did my part, managed my responsibilities, but I didn't try to fix Terry's mess. Not this time. Some lessons needed to be learned the hard way. The breaking point came during a progress review with senior leadership. Terry tried to blame the delays on team execution issues, which was his way of saying everyone else wasn't good enough to implement his genius. But the VP wasn't buying it. These deadlines were your proposal, Terry. The team expressed concerns from the beginning. Terry's face reddened. With the right attitude, anything is possible. The VP's expression said exactly what he thought of that answer. As we left the meeting, I knew the clock was ticking on Terry's reign. The opportunity arrived exactly when I'd been expecting it. The VP called me into her office on a Friday afternoon, and I knew before she spoke what was coming. "Maggie, we have a situation," she began. "The Westfield Initiative. You're familiar with it." Familiar was an understatement. The Westfield Initiative was the company's biggest strategic push for the next fiscal year. High profile, high stakes, high visibility. The kind of project that could make or break careers. "I've been following it," I said carefully. "We need someone to lead it. Someone who can actually deliver results, not just make promises." She looked at me directly. "I'm offering it to you." My heart hammered, but I kept my expression neutral. "What about Terry?" "Terry will remain director, but this project needs dedicated leadership. Someone detail-oriented, reliable. Someone who can build trust with the client." He paused. "Someone who doesn't crumble under pressure." There it was. The moment I'd been working toward since that humiliating day in the conference room. The chance to prove not just that I could recover but that I could excel. "I'll do it," I said. Not eagerly, not desperately. Just confidently. "I know you will," she replied. "That's why I chose you." As I walked out, I knew Terry would hear about this within hours. And I knew he'd be furious. But let him watch. The Westfield Initiative consumed everything. I worked 16-hour days, reviewing every detail, building the team, mapping out strategy. I wasn't just trying to succeed. I was trying to create something undeniable. Something so well executed that no one, not even Terry, could diminish it. Terry tried to interfere, of course. He'd show up at meetings with suggestions, that were really attempts to redirect the project toward his vision. He'd question my decisions in front of the team, trying to undermine my authority. But I'd learned from watching him. I responded to every challenge with data, with clear reasoning, with calm professionalism. When he proposed flashy changes, I showed why steady execution would deliver better results. When he questioned my timeline, I walked him through the risk management that made it realistic. The team rallied behind me. They'd worked under Terry long enough to appreciate a leader who listened, who valued their expertise, who didn't promise the impossible and then blame them when reality intervened. Oliver pulled me aside one evening as we were wrapping up. "You know he's terrified, right, Terry? He sees what's happening." "What's happening?" I asked innocently. Oliver grinned. "You're becoming what he pretends to be. An actual leader." I didn't respond, but his words settled warm in my chest. This was working. Slowly, methodically, exactly as planned. 3 months into the Westfield initiative, we hit our first major milestone ahead of schedule. The client was thrilled. Senior leadership was impressed. And for the first time since Terry's public attack, I felt genuinely confident presenting to the executive team. I walked them through our progress with PowerPoint slides that were clear, data-driven, and honest about both successes and challenges. No false promises, no exaggerated claims. Just solid work producing solid results. The VP nodded approvingly throughout. When I finished, she said, "This is exactly the kind of execution we need across all our projects." "Thank you, Maggie." Terry sat in the back of the room, his face carefully neutral. But I saw his jaw clenching, saw his fingers drumming against his leg. He hated this. Hated seeing me succeed where he'd expected me to fail. Hated that I'd taken his criticism and turned it into fuel. After the meeting, several executives stopped to congratulate me personally. As I packed up my laptop, the VP approached again. "I want your input on something," she said quietly. "We're restructuring the department. I'd like to discuss a more senior role for you." I kept my expression professional, but inside triumph surged. "I'd be happy to discuss it." Terry was still in the room. I knew he'd heard every word. And I knew it was killing him. Terry's desperation was becoming obvious. He started inserting himself into every aspect of my project, trying to claim credit for decisions I'd made, attempting to redirect strategies that were already working. In meetings, he'd say things like, "as I suggested to Maggie," or "following my guidance, the team has." Nobody was fooled. The team knew who was actually leading. So did senior leadership. But Terry couldn't see it. His ego wouldn't allow him to recognize that his influence was evaporating. He kept pushing harder, becoming more aggressive, making increasingly erratic decisions in his other projects. I watched it all with careful observation. Each overreach, each desperate attempt to assert dominance, just made him look weaker. The more he tried to diminish my success, the more obvious his insecurity became. One afternoon, he actually tried to take over a client meeting I'd scheduled. He showed up unannounced, ready to present his vision for the project. But the client stopped him. "Actually, Terry, we're here to discuss implementation details with Maggie. She's been handling everything perfectly." The look on Terry's face was priceless. Confusion, then anger, then forced pleasantness. "Of course," he managed. "Just wanted to check in." He left after 10 minutes. The client turned to me apologetically. "Is he always like that?" "He means well," I said diplomatically. But we both knew what I really meant. The breaking point came during a crisis I'd been half expecting. One of Terry's pet projects, one he'd been managing directly without team input, completely collapsed. A major client pulled out, citing broken promises and missed deadlines. The financial impact was significant. Senior leadership was furious. An emergency meeting was called, and Terry tried his usual routine, blaming external factors, making excuses, suggesting the team hadn't executed his vision properly. But this time the VP cut him off. "Terry, this project failed because of poor planning and unrealistic promises. Your team warned you. The documentation shows multiple red flags you ignored. Terry's face went pale. Those were calculated risks. They were reckless decisions, the VP corrected. And now we're dealing with the consequences. The meeting ended with Terry's responsibilities being restructured to allow for better oversight. Corporate speak for, we don't trust you anymore. As everyone filed out, the VP caught my eye. A small nod, barely perceptible. But the message was clear. They were watching, evaluating, preparing for changes. Terry's empire was crumbling. And I hadn't had to do anything except be competent while he self-destructed. Sometimes the best revenge is just getting out of someone's way while they destroy themselves. The Westfield initiative reached its final phase, and we were crushing every metric. Client satisfaction was at 98%. We'd come in under budget. The implementation was smooth. Everything Terry's projects weren't. The final presentation to senior leadership was scheduled for a Friday morning. I'd prepared meticulously, but I wasn't nervous. This wasn't about proving myself anymore. This was about cementing what everyone already knew. I was ready for the next level. Terry tried one last desperate move. The night before my presentation, he sent an email to senior leadership claiming there were concerns about project sustainability that needed to be addressed. It was vague, unprofessional, and obviously motivated by spite. The VP forwarded it to me with a single line. Handle this however you see fit. I didn't even respond. I just added an extra slide to my presentation showing our sustainability plan, risk mitigation strategies, and long-term support structure. Every concern Terry could possibly raise, I addressed with data and documentation. That morning, I presented with confidence I'd earned through months of relentless work. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. The CEO himself stood up to shake my hand. This is what excellence looks like, he announced. This is the standard we expect moving forward. Terry sat in the corner, his expression frozen. He'd tried to sabotage me. And instead, I delivered the best presentation of my career. The restructuring announcement came the following Monday. Terry was being reassigned to a strategic advisory role, which everyone understood meant he was being shuffled sideways into irrelevance. His direct reports would be redistributed. His projects would be transferred to other leaders. The department he'd ruled for 5 years was being dismantled. I was promoted to senior director, reporting directly to the VP. My first responsibility would be overseeing the transition and ensuring project continuity. In other words, I'd be taking over everything Terry had built. The official announcement went out at 9. By 9:30, my inbox was flooded with congratulations. Teammates, colleagues from other departments, even a few clients who'd heard the news. Terry didn't congratulate me. He didn't say anything at all. When I passed his office later that morning, he was packing personal items into a box. His movements stiff and mechanical. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered standing in that conference room, humiliated in front of 50 people, feeling small and worthless while he smirked. He tried to break me. Instead, he'd forged me into something stronger. As I walked past, he looked up. Our eyes met for just a moment. I saw anger there and resentment, but also something else. Recognition. He finally understood who I really was. My first week as senior director was surreal. Same office, same building, but everything felt different. People treated me differently, listened more carefully, implemented suggestions without questioning my authority. The responsibility was heavy, but it felt right. This was what I'd been working toward, what I'd proven I could handle. I restructured Terry's old projects, fixing the broken processes and unrealistic expectations. I met with every team member individually, listening to their concerns, rebuilding trust that had been eroded by years of poor leadership. The transformation was immediate. Without Terry's ego-driven decisions and last-minute changes, projects moved smoothly. Teams collaborated better. Morale improved dramatically. Oliver stopped by my office with coffee, a tradition we'd maintained for years. "You know what's crazy," he said. How much better everything runs without him. He wasn't all bad, I said, trying to be fair. Oliver laughed. Yes, he was. And you know it. The only good thing Terry did was underestimate you. That night, working late as usual, I thought about Oliver's words. Terry had underestimated me. He'd assumed humiliating me publicly would break my spirit, would put me in my place. Instead, it had awakened something I didn't know I had. A fierce determination to prove not just that I could recover, but that I could exceed every expectation. 3 months into my new role, the VP called me into her office again. I'd been expecting this meeting, had known it was coming since the restructuring. Maggie, I want to talk about Terry, she began. Specifically, I want to apologize. I blinked, surprised. Apologize? We knew he was difficult. We'd received complaints about his management style before. But he delivered results, or so we thought, so we let things slide. She looked uncomfortable. When he publicly criticized you in that meeting, we should have intervened. Instead, we watched to see how you'd handle it. You were testing me, I said slowly. Yes, and I'm not proud of that. But your response was remarkable. Instead of complaining or becoming bitter, you simply became better. She smiled. Terry did us a favor, actually. He revealed his own weaknesses while showcasing your strengths. The irony was almost poetic. The moment Terry thought he'd destroyed me had actually been my audition for his job. What's happening with him now? Yes. He resigned last week. Found a position at a smaller company. He paused. He's someone else's problem now. I nodded, feeling oddly empty. I'd spent months focused on proving myself, on rising above his attacks. Now it was over and I felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction. Just relief. What's next for you? She asked. Smiled. Keep doing what I'm doing. But better. 6 months into senior leadership, I'd completely transformed the department. Projects were finishing on time and under budget. Client satisfaction was the highest it had been in years. Team morale surveys showed dramatic improvement. But I wasn't satisfied with just fixing what Terry had broken. I wanted to build something new, something sustainable. I proposed a new initiative focused on mentoring junior team members, creating clear career paths, and preventing the kind of toxic leadership that had defined Terry's tenure. The VP loved it. The CEO approved funding immediately. I thought about that conference room often. About standing there, humiliated, feeling like my career was over. About the choice I'd made in that moment, to turn pain into purpose, to let Terry's cruelty fuel my determination rather than defeat me. Young women on the team started coming to me for advice. How did you do it? They'd ask. How did you handle being treated like that? I decided I was worth more than his opinion of me. I'd tell them. And then I proved it. The truth was more complicated, but the message was real. Nobody could diminish my worth unless I let them. Terry had tried. But I'd refused to accept his narrative about who I was. Instead, I'd written my own story. A year after my promotion, I was invited to speak at a leadership conference. The topic: leading through adversity. I almost declined, uncomfortable with sharing my story publicly. But the VP encouraged me. Your experience matters, she said. Other people need to hear it. So I spoke about that conference room. About humiliation and doubt and the choice to keep going. I didn't mention Terry by name, didn't need to. The story was universal enough. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of people approached me afterward, sharing their own stories of difficult bosses, public failures, moments when they'd almost quit. We'd all been there, standing in that conference room in one form or another. What made the difference? Someone asked. What kept you going? I thought about it carefully. I realized that one person's opinion, even a boss's opinion, doesn't define my worth or my capabilities. My work defines me. My results define me. Everything else is just noise. That night, scrolling through LinkedIn, I saw that Terry had posted about his new role. He looked happy, confident. Maybe he'd learned something from our experience. Maybe not. Either way, it didn't matter anymore. His chapter in my story was over. He was just the antagonist who'd unknowingly pushed me toward my best self. The Westfield initiative continued to exceed expectations, generating revenue beyond projections and attracting new clients. Other departments started asking me to consult on their projects, to share strategies that had worked for my team. I was becoming known not just as the person who'd replaced Terry, but as a leader in my own right. Someone who delivered results, developed talent, and built sustainable success. The comparison to Terry was inevitable, especially from people who'd worked under both of us. "You're nothing like him," they'd say, always with relief. I took that as the highest compliment. But I also recognized that Terry's failure had taught me valuable lessons. I saw how ego could blind a leader to their own weaknesses. How arrogance alienated the people whose support you needed most. How short-term wins built on false promises always collapsed eventually. I worked hard to be the opposite. To listen more than I spoke. To give credit generously. To build others up rather than tearing them down. To make decisions based on data rather than ego. Everything Terry wasn't, I tried to be. Not out of spite, but because I'd seen firsthand the damage bad leadership caused. I lived it. And I refused to inflict that on anyone else. 2 years after that devastating conference room meeting, I was promoted again. Executive Director. A position I'd never imagined reaching so quickly, but one I'd earned through consistent excellence. The promotion announcement mentioned my remarkable leadership during challenging transitions, and my commitment to developing talent while delivering results. Corporate speak for. She fixed the mess Terry left and made it better than it was before. That evening, I stood in the same conference room where Terry had humiliated me. It looked different now. Or maybe I looked at it differently. The room where I'd felt so small now felt empowering, a reminder of how far I'd come. Oliver found me there. Visiting the scene of the crime, he joked. Something like that. Smiled. Remembering. You know what I remember, he said. The look on your face that day. I thought you might cry or quit or both. But you just sat there taking it. And then you walked out and became unstoppable. I wasn't unstoppable. I was terrified. Same thing sometimes. He clinked his coffee cup against mine. To being terrified and doing it anyway. That night, I wrote an email I'd been composing mentally for months. Not to send, just to write. A letter to my past self, sitting in that conference room, heartbreaking. Gets better. Gets so much better. Hold on. My 3rd year in leadership brought new challenges, bigger responsibilities, higher stakes. But I'd learned something crucial. Difficult moments don't destroy you. They reveal you. Terry's criticism had revealed my resilience. His attempts to undermine me had revealed my strategic thinking. His failures had revealed the leader I was capable of becoming. I thought about him sometimes, wondered if he'd learned anything, if he'd changed his approach. Probably not. People like Terry rarely did. His ego wouldn't allow him to see his own role in his downfall. But I changed. That conference room experience had forged something in me that couldn't be broken. A core of steel wrapped in professionalism. The ability to take a hit and keep moving forward. Young professionals would ask me for advice, and I'd tell them the truth. Difficult bosses happen. Unfair criticism happens. Moments where you feel utterly defeated happen. But those moments don't define your career. Your response to them does. I'd become living proof of that principle. The boutique leadership consulting firm that Terry had joined reached out, asking if I'd be interested in joining their advisory board. I declined politely. Our paths didn't need to cross again. I'd moved beyond him. Beyond that moment. Beyond the need to prove anything to anyone except myself. 5 years after Terry's public criticism, I was featured in a business magazine profile about transformational leadership. The article mentioned my rapid rise, the department's success under my guidance, the culture of excellence and respect I'd built. It mentioned Terry only briefly, as previous leadership, that had been replaced during restructuring. He'd become a footnote in my success story. The profile's opening paragraph quoted me. The worst moment of my career became the catalyst for the best phase of my career. Sometimes you need to be knocked down to discover how strong you really are. I'd framed that conference room experience differently now. Not as Terry destroying me, but as Terry accidentally revealing something I hadn't known about myself. I was unbreakable. His cruelty had been his undoing and my beginning. The magazine hit stands on a Tuesday. My phone exploded with messages from colleagues, old classmates, people I hadn't heard from in years. Everyone celebrating, everyone proud. One message stood out. From Kelsey, my former teammate. You know what's amazing? You never became bitter. You never became like him. You just became better. That, I realized, was the real victory. Not that I'd surpassed Terry professionally, but that I'd done it without sacrificing my integrity or humanity. The company threw a celebration for our team's 5 consecutive years of exceeding targets. As I stood before the room, looking at faces I'd mentored and worked alongside, I felt genuine pride. This wasn't Terry's team anymore. It wasn't even really my team. It was our team, built on mutual respect, honest communication, and shared success. During my speech, I thanked everyone for their contributions, their resilience during the transition years, their commitment to excellence. I didn't mention Terry. There was no need. Afterward, the VP pulled me aside. You know what impresses me most, she said. You could have been vindictive. You could have badmouthed him, made his transition painful. But you took the high road. Revenge wasn't the goal, I replied. Success was. She smiled. That's why you're here and he's not. Walking home that evening, I thought about the journey. From that humiliating conference room moment to this celebration. From feeling worthless to feeling genuinely proud of what I'd built. Terry had tried to make me small. Instead, he'd accidentally shown me how big I could become. The best revenge, I'd learned, wasn't destroying your enemy. It was becoming so successful that they became irrelevant. 7 years later, I barely thought about Terry anymore. He'd become a distant memory, a character in a story I sometimes told but rarely revisited. I'd built something real. A department known for excellence, a team that trusted each other, a culture where people could be challenged without being diminished. Everything I'd wished for during those dark days after Terry's attack. Sometimes young professionals would ask about my career path, and I'd tell them honestly. I had a boss once who publicly humiliated me. He thought he was ending my career. Instead, he gave me the motivation to surpass every expectation I'd ever had for myself. Did you forgive him? They'd ask. I think about that question carefully. I stopped needing to. Forgiveness assumes he still has power over my story. He doesn't. That was the truth. Terry wasn't my villain anymore. He was just a person who'd once underestimated me, who'd learned too late the cost of cruelty. I'd walked out of that conference room humiliated but unbroken. I'd turned pain into purpose, defeat into determination. I'd proven that one person's opinion, no matter how loudly stated, couldn't define my worth. Standing in my executive office looking out over the city, I smiled. Not at Terry's downfall, but at my own rise. Not because I'd won some petty battle, but because I'd discovered something essential about myself. I was stronger than anyone's worst opinion of me, including my own. That conference room had been my lowest moment, but it had also been my beginning. The day I stopped seeking approval and started demanding respect through excellence. The day I became who I was always meant to be.